So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thanks for joining this instance of the Antrea community meeting. This is the last meeting for the month of May 2022. And in the agenda for today, we have a presentation of a design for a proposal for virtual machine support from Wenning MND. So I will probably just let them present, and yeah, and then maybe after that we'll have some conversation, open discussion. So I don't know if who's going to present, whether Wenning or Mandy, but please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thanks, Salvato. And today, Wenying and I will share the detailed design for the external node. And here's the agenda for today. And I will first go through the background information for this feature and focus on mainly on API changes and controller side of changes. And Wenying will further share the details for the agent side of changes. And here's some background and motivation. And some workloads, like virtual machines or bare metal servers, are actually outside of the Kubernetes cluster, and they are not Kubernetes nodes. But we still want to enforce our Antrea native network policies to these workloads. And that's why we propose this design. We also expect both Windows and Linux operating systems will be supported for this feature. And we have an example scenario for this feature. Here's the example use case. We have defined an Antrea network policy with spec like this, and we want to apply this Antrea network policy to the external entity, which has labels row equals DB. And in this graph, it is VM1. It has the label matches the external entity selector. And I need to mention that this part of Antrea network policy change is not supported right now, and it is the new feature we want to add it to the Antrea network policy. And in the egress, there are two rules. You can see that we will allow the traffic from the external entity which has labels row equals front end, and we will drop the traffic from the IP block which within this CIDR. And so in this graph, the traffic from VM2 to VM1 will be allowed, but traffic from VM3 to VM1 will be dropped with this Antrea network policy defined. And then this is our target. And for the Antrea network policy applied to the external entity, we want to support it. We want to follow the same behavior for as the current Antrea network policy. So we will support actions of allow, drop, and reject. And the to and from field of the ANP rule, it can be IP block, external entity, and pod and FQDN for the egress. And this is for the, it is the background information for this feature. And if there's no question for this part, I will go through the two API changes we proposed for this feature. And the first one is we want to introduce a new CRD called external node to represent the virtual machine or the bare metal server, which is not a Kubernetes node, but has Antrea agent running on it. And it is the definition for the proposed CRD. And in the external node stack, we will define the network interface. And for the network interface, you can specify name and IPs or either of them. No, we expect IP is the must have field. If you, I will see later that if you don't specify IP for the network interface, we will not generate the corresponding external entity for this external node. And I also need to point out that we define an array for the interfaces here, but for the first release, we will only support one interface per external node. Multiple interfaces may be supported in the future release. Now, another API change is the Antrea network policy API changes. As I have already pointed out on the example case, we want to add an external entity selector in the ANP apply to field. So for with this change for API ANP apply to field, it can be either pod selector or external entity selector. I want to mention that users can use external node label in the external entity selector. It is because that we see external node is a kind of external entity, so that you can use the external node label directly in the external entity selector to choose the apply to VMs.
Among the acquiring here, I think even external entity, we do copy labels from external node to external entity, right? No?
Right. I will talk about it in this page.
Okay, Paula, I can wait for your later slide. One more question. When we support namespace group, we will also support external entity in the namespace group. And the group can be used for apply to, right?
The group.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. I haven't tried it.
Hello, Zhenjuan, your answer is yes. The answer to your question is yes. When we support the namespace group, we will apply.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, that is the API part of changes. And for controller side of changes, controller will do two things. One is to convert the external node to external entity. Another is to manage the Antrea agent info life cycle. And for the first one, we will convert the external node to external entity based on the following rules. And first, we will generate for the external entity name. If the network interface name is empty, we will use the external node name directly. If the network interface name is not empty, we will instead use external node name hyphen an interface name as the external entity name. And as Jianjun has already pointed out, all the external node labels will be added to the external entity. And external node name will be set the external node name field in the external entity. The last one is that we will populate the external entity endpoint field with the information set in the external node network interface. And if there are multiple IPs for an interface, multiple endpoints will be generated accordingly to the external entity. And here I have an example for this conversion. We define an external node, which is called VM1 under the namespace VM demo. It has the labels row equals DB, and it has the interface. Interface name can be specified or ignored in the definition, and it has one IP here. For the generated external entity, it has the same name as external node because interface name here is not specified. So we will use the external node directly. And for the namespace, they are the same, and labels, they are the same. And if there are multiple labels here, then it will be multiple labels here. And we also add a field called owner reference to let this external entity to point to the external node. So we will know that which external node is used to generate this external entity. And for the endpoints, it is populated based on the interfaces field. And another important field is the external node field. It will be set the same name as the name for this external node. And basically, the general idea is that we will generate an external node, an external entity for each interface defined in the external node. As currently, we won't only support one interface per node. So currently, external node and external entity is one-to-one mapping. Yeah, if there is no question for the conversion here, I will go ahead. Another part of change from controller side is the Antrea agent info lifecycle management. Basically, controller will watch the external node create and delete event. And based on that, it will create the Antrea agent info and delete the Antrea agent info, whose name is the same as the external node name. So with this change, it is the Antrea controller who create and delete the Antrea agent info. And it is the Antrea agent who will update the content of this Antrea agent info. And the advantage for this change is that we can only grant the update privilege for the Antrea agent info and don't grant the create and update privilege to this VM. So that it is a more secure way from the VM perspective. Yeah, I have talked about the API changes and the Antrea controller side of changes. I'm not sure if anyone has any other question for this part. Yeah, I will, if not, I will let Wenying to further go through the details for the Antrea agent side of changes and share the detailed design.
Thanks, Mandy. Maybe you can continue. Yeah. From agent, actually, the task was two realization. One is for realizing external node, and the second is for realizing internal policy, which was applied to the target VM, or we could say the external node. So when agent is starting up, we should first give an environment variable with the external node name as the environment variable key node name, as what we have done on the container case. Then after agent is started, it knows who it is. Then agents will get the external node from the Kube API server with a filter by its own name. So for each VM, it will not get other VM's external node information. And then agents can get the network interfaces configured in the external node and try to guide the corresponding network interface from the host. And then agents will try to realize interface on OS. For the details about how agent realize network interface on OS, I will use the next page to introduce. And after the agent realize the network interface on OS, it maintains a new external entity interface config in interface store, which can be consumed by internal policy. For the internal policy realization, it is similar to the existing workload. Antrea agent still watches internal policy internal objects from Antrea controller, and it reads the external entity from interface store, which was created by the external node realization. And then Antrea agent can realize the internal policy rules on OS. So from the page, we can see the normal workflow. Actually, we are focusing on these two passes. And Mondia, maybe you can go to the next page. Okay, thanks. This page I could focusing on the realization for network interface. First of all, VM case, the major difference from the container case is that we should maintain manage the host network is what we are focusing on. So to not break the existing processes consuming the networking, we will try to use a new network interface configured with the existing name and IP and MAC and routing of the network interface configured in the external node. So when after Antrea agent finds the interface by the IP address on the host, it first rename the network interface to, for example, I use the PNX 0 in the diagram, and then we create the PNX 0 to OS. Actually, this is the physical interface on the OS on the VM. Then Antrea agent will try to create a new OS internal port, which is configured with the ETH0, which will ETH0 is actually the interface name before we start Antrea agent. And then Antrea agent will move the IP, MAC, routing, even DNS configurations to the either ETH0, I mean the OS internal port. From the OS open flow entries, Antrea agent will try to configure some open flow entries to ensure the packet can be forwarded from the ETH0 to PNX 0 or from PNX 0 to ETH0 directly if we don't have some IP pipeline consumptions, but that's the next details. And for the interface config part, after the pair ports they are added onto the OS, we create an interface config. I mean, one interface config is used to map the pair ports. So in the new type of interface config to represent external entity, we have to maintain the pair ports. We have two open flow ports. One is the internal OS port, and another is the mapping uplink port. And the interface config name is actually ETH0. I mean the name defined in the external node network interface. Then Antrea agent also set up some open flow pipelines for the external node. We have IP pipeline, but for the external node IP pipeline, we are only focusing on the egress and the ingress. So we don't have layer 2 or layer 3 forwarding. As I mentioned, because of the pair ports, we try to forward packets from one to the pair directly. And as we should maintain the host network, we should also maintain the non-IP packets in the OS pipeline. So we need to introduce a new table focusing on the non-IP packets. But for this new pipeline, we directly forward packet from one to the pair. With the changes on the external node for OS path, the new pipeline definition has only 4 tables, and I listed the table ID and name mapping in this page. That's the main change for the agent side. I'm not sure if you any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. So, so for example, on the bare metal use case, there could be multiple interfaces, and could be possible that we have different VLAN settings for different interfaces. So do you need to reflect that in the OpenWidth switch configuration, port configuration?
By now, in our first release, we only want to support single interface, and we are targeting at the VM case. So maybe we have a few thoughts about the bare metal case, but we maybe have some thinking about it later.
Got it. So the workloads actually the applications inside the VM. So you only need to enforce the security policies on the VM interface on the bridge.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
One more I want to mention is that since we are focusing on the egress and ingress, we still use OS contract, but only one OS contract zone is used to maintain the connection state. That's the one thing I want to mention for the security part.
I have a question. You might have talked about it, but I may miss it. I see in the first, in the above picture, the physical interface is called Ether0, but in the picture below, the physical interface is called PNIC0. So will you do interface rename when attaching?
Actually, we first do the rename on the interface and then attach it to OS. But after, if the user deletes external node, I mean, if we want to remove the interfaces from OS, we will rename the PNIC0 back to ETH0. I think that's your question, right?
Yes. So this is mainly to keep the original name to be the one used by the operating system.
Yeah, you're correct. This is because we are thinking that maybe some other processes are listening on the ETH0, but if we just use the original name to OS and then create a new OS port with a different name, and since the IP and the routing migrated from the existing interfaces to the new OS internal ports, the other processes listening on the ETH0 might be broken. So that's the motivation why we need to rename the interfaces and try our best to keep the IP and the MAC are configured on the interface with the same name.
I see, thanks.
So I also have a question. So we are using just one bridge. We are not using multiple bridges for multiple interfaces, right? And then
yeah, we only use one bridge.
And then you have we will have some flows to force the ETH0 to PNIC0, and the packets will not, for example, coming into ETH0 and coming out from PNIC1. So you always have flows to exchange the package between the matching virtual interface and the physical interface.
Correct. As you may know that for container case, when the packet enter OS pipeline in the table 0, we only set the source register mark to know that where the packet is entering OS from. But in external node case, in the first table of IP pipeline, maybe not just the first table in the OS pipeline, we are already setting the target of port in the register 1. And in the last table, we only output the packet to register 1, which was kept in the table, in the first table. So we don't need the layer 2 or layer 3 table to forward packet according to destination IP or destination MAC. We don't need this analyze in external node case.
Understood. Thanks.
So when in I remember in NST design, we choose to attach the physical interface to the bridge with Etherpile. And I remember one reason to be for the, I think it's for the OpenWSH restart case. I think there's some difference between internal port and the Etherpile in that case. I'm not very sure. I'm not sure you know about that, or have you thought about that?
We used to have some short discussion about this design, but I think it might introduce some issues because we need to maintain different namespaces for this case. But I didn't think deep for this solution because we think it is workable. Maybe we could have some evaluation if you think it is needed.
Yeah, maybe check what's the reason we used to use vSpile. I remember some reasons for that.
Sure, I will check with the SST guys about the design.
Why it's relevant to namespace? Sorry.
According to my original discussion with them, they said that they want to keep the name of the pair the same as the existing interfaces. So they want to use a namespace for each interfaces pair.
No, but yeah, maybe they do that for their purpose. But in your case, even you just put a vSpile in the default namespace, it should be the same as the internal port, right?
Yeah, it is internal port, but actually I think Antrea agent should maintain I mean that if we want to use a namespace to configure the network interface with the same name, we should require other processes to go into that namespace.
Sure, but I'm not saying we must put the vSpile in a different name. I'm just saying, could we replace internal port with vSpile? Even we put all the devices in the same namespace, the default namespace.
But I didn't see the advantage for this pair.
Yeah, that's what I forgot. So let's. I hope you can double check what's the reason they use with vSpile in the NST design. Sure. I think there are some reason about OpenWC restart case.
Sure, I will check with them.
Sure.
Thanks.
And one more small question for me. Do we support also dynamic addresses on these interfaces? So for instance, if Ethernet 0 is DHCP, when we move it to an internal interface, will we still support it?
We did some test on DHCP since we moved the interface OS internal port using the same name as the existing interfaces, and actually we can capture the DHCP packet after we move the IP address to the OS internal port, and we see that the DHCP client is still working. But since we moved the IP address statically on the OS internal port, so the DHCP client only renew the IP address but not request new ones. That's what we found in the test.
Yeah, I think that that is good enough, right? That's what we needed. Thanks for your answer.
Thank you. Actually, we only prepare this for the design. So I don't know if other questions.
Well, I believe that we probably want to open for conversation with the entire community. That is like let's say that from a design perspective, probably it's from this presentation, it's less than what it looks like, because there are many changes that are going into the OVS pipeline for supporting virtual machines. So one question that I had is, what is your plan for implementing the changes in the OVS pipeline? Are we going to treat external nodes as a special case, or are we going to develop a completely different pipeline for that, or what is your the solution that you have in mind?
First, for the code changes, we are using a feature gate to control the code branches. And for the GitHub, we are creating a feature branch to maintain the code after all the changes are ready. And so since we are supporting the flexible pipeline, I mean, for the OSI path changes, since we are already supporting the flexible pipeline, so one agent is running on a VM or bare metal server, the pipeline only is introduced for the external cases. So we don't have the case that for OS pipelines for container and external existing on the same agent case. And actually for the code merge plan, we plan to have this code in the next release for Antrea, maybe 1.8. So we hope we can complete all the code and merge in Antrea 1.8, and then we can merge the fish branch to main branch.
Oh, okay, great. And well, I would like to solicit more questions for the community. Any sort of question, please go ahead. Junjun has a question on the chat regarding specifically table 14, no IP. I was also curious why no IP. Junjun suggests that maybe it should be non-IP.
Sure, we will remember it as non-IP in the code.
Okay, so if there is no other question, I would like to seek a clarification on the relationship between external node and external entity. Can you go back to the slide that Mandy presented? So my question here, yep, perfect, this one. There would be a controller, I assume, that reads this information and creates the external entity resource. Now, is this just taking data from one entity and moving it into other data, or does it also involve searching for a VM using some provider?
No, we will just monitoring the external node CRUD and create, update, or delete the corresponding external entity.
Okay, so we are not searching for the actual VM or bare metal node that has that interface, right?
If user config some invalid information, as you mean, in the interfaces, and when the agent side monitoring the external node, it will search the interface by IP. If it cannot find the corresponding interface, and it will not do any further procession, and we can see some errors from agent side.
I see. And I have another question, sorry. In terms of information, the resource on the right, external entity, what kind of information is adding on top of the external node? Because I see that it seems to me, I'm sorry, maybe I'm mistaken here, that there are exactly the same attributes, just in a different order.
You mean the owner reference here?
No. The owner reference is fine. We understand it. In terms, I'm talking in terms of specification. It seems to me that we have exactly the same data, right? There are no additional data in external entity, so there are no additional. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. For external node case, we will only set the endpoints field for external entity here, and for the definition here, they are slightly different because the interface network interface we define it has one name but multiple IPs for a interface. But for the endpoint, existing definition is one name and one IP. So if there are multiple IPs here, you will define an array with multiple endpoints in this field. Yeah, we will not set other fields. I know you mean that external entity has other fields except the endpoints. And for external node case, we will not set those fields. Only endpoints field will be set.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yes,
And,
Audrey, probably,
go ahead,
I can give you a little context here. Actually, we have two types of external entities. I think what Mengdi and Wen showed here is just one type. This type is created from external node. Basically, it's a VM. We create an external entity from external node for that VM. But they can be another type. It's more like in this public cloud support, we discover the VMs and the native service in public clouds, but we don't run agents inside the VM. But we just, so it's no external node. It's basically external node still means a node that we really run OpenSwitch and agent, Antrea agent in the node. But in the agentless code, agentless case I mentioned, we don't really run agent in the agentless VM, but we just discover VM and create an external entity for the VM. So you say originally we introduced external entity before external node. So at that time, it's only for the agentless case. That's why you don't have this interface or multiple interface or it's external node CRD earlier, but we just have external entity. But since we start to add the agent model for VM, and now we decided probably we need a new CRD to express the VM with agent, and we call it external node. But still, for most of our code to handle policy and other data paths logic, we just want to use external entity. I'm not sure my explanation is clear to you.
That's that is correct. That is correct, and this also I understand now why there are two. We are using two CRs, but I have a final question. So, for the external entities which are owned by an external node, I assume that we also have controls in place to make sure that endpoints and other spec information are not accidentally modified. I don't know if I was clear.
Yeah, Mengdi, when you
sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Yeah,
which the endpoints?
Let's assume that I am a clumsy user. So I have an external entity which is attached to a VM with owner reference owned by an external node. Then I decide to go to endpoints and I modify the IP addresses here in endpoints. Now, will there be a mechanism that resynchronizes again the external entity to the external node, or do we have just to tell users that you should not go and modify this?
You mean if user accidentally modify the field?
Yeah.
For the current implementation, I will correct in the reconciliation if the if the controller restart, we will reconcile all the external node and it can change it back. But during the controller, when the controller is running, we didn't check the external entity periodically to make sure user doesn't make any modification fault. But actually, I think as we have already pointed out, there are two kinds of external entity. The previous external entity, which is for the agentless VM, and it doesn't have the owner references here because they are not created by external node. So we hope the user should not change the external entity which are created by external node. But if they modify this, we can only correct it when the controller restart in the reconciliation. Yeah.
Sounds good, but let's assume that a user does this because they are probably not that smart, or there will be no impact on network policy enforcement, right? It's not like they will change the way in which network policies are enforced if they modify, like adding endpoints here.
For the OV, as part of the part change, because we monitor the external node, it will not have any impact. But for if you change the external entity part, because the agent side network policy controller is actually watching the external entity selector. So if you modify the external entity by accident, I think it may have an impact.
Okay. Okay. So now, sorry, I don't want to steal all the meeting, but I have to ask another question. So do we have to worry about the case where the user is not clumsy, but maliciously tries to modify this data to impact the way in which network policies are enforced?
I'm not sure. Maybe we can investigate to see if there is a way to forbid the users to change the external entity generate by the Antrea controller to make sure that.
But who will be the users? Because, for example, the namespace is UN demo, so the users are in. Are you referring to the Kubernetes admin, or are you referring to the namespace manager of VM demo? Because maybe we can assume that Kubernetes admin and the namespace manager are the guy who are managing the security policy, and they will not maliciously override the information in the namespace. And the workload user inside the VM cannot reach to Kubernetes and has no authorization on managing this information.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I believe that these are Kubernetes CRs, so even securing those should be managed with Kubernetes airbag. So yeah, it should not be a big deal. It's just a matter of making sure that that access to external entity as the proper airbag controllers.
Got it. So maybe later we can have, for example, validating webhook. If there is only a reference, refer back to the external node. Maybe the validating webhook can reject any modification that's not from the Antrea controller.
All right. Sorry for asking so many questions. I know, and well, I do hope that somebody else from the community has any question here. So please, if you have any additional question regarding this feature, please go ahead. Waiting a few more seconds. All right, it appears then that there are no questions, and we're looking forward to see this feature included in Antrea 1.8. And I guess that now we can move to open discussion. So if there is any topic that you would like to bring up, any bug that you would like to discuss, anything that you would like to complain about, please go ahead. Okay, so just a quick update from me. Last week there was a KubeCon in Valencia, in Spain. As you know, we had an Antrea office hour. Chan and myself hosted it. We didn't have many participants, but at the highest we had like 15 participants in the meeting. We had a small short introductory presentation about Antrea features, the scope of the project, the status SSC and CF project, and I have to say that was pretty much it. There was still very little user interaction, as it typically is for these office hour sessions, but I believe that there was already an improvement compared to the previous edition in terms of community participation. So that's all. And I will just wait a minute for check if other team members have anything to discuss. And otherwise, we can call it a day.
Salter, you didn't go to KubeCon in person?
No, I did
I'm just
not go
curious.
to.
Okay.
I did not go to KubeCon in person. Eve was there from our team. Susan was there. Madhu was there. I personally felt that I was still not okay with going into a room full with thousands of people.
I see.
And also, to be honest with you, I did not have time. It was pretty much like taking a week off, and I did not have time to take a week off. And I was planning to travel to Palo Alto and in the end of June to see the team, but they closed the campus. So I don't know if I can travel anymore.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
There was an email on Friday that the VMware campus is closed to non-essential employees.
I see.
But yeah, but that's pretty much it. So
yeah, I look for the sometime you will be able to come.
Yep. Anyway, so I believe we can stop the recording, and that's all for today. So thanks again for joining, and I wish everyone a good day, a good afternoon. If you are in the West Coast, I wish you a good night.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.